Hello and welcome to another podcast from House & House. My name is Stephen Leckie. I am a real estate agent here at House & House, and I am joined today by Minesh, a UK expat who's now living in Dubai and investing here in Dubai on property. And also I am joined by Mr. Luke Remington, who is one of the managing directors of House & House Group of Companies. And welcome, gentlemen, to the podcast of, Unplugged? Yes.
It's nice to be here, Stephen.
Good, nice to see you both. So one of the things we could talk about is the day after the UK budget, and one of the reasons I was going to bring Minesh in to talk about was as a property owner in the UK, and now he's in the UAE doing something similar in terms of investing in property. And we just wanted to talk, we will talk about the budget, but I also wanted to just have a chat with Minesh about the financial reasons why getting out of property in the UK and bringing his money over to the UAE is beneficial and why he's actually doing it.
Okay. I think when I've looked at the portfolio I've got in the UK that I've built up over, the last 10, 15 years, it's been a great model. It's worked. I bought at the right time, rented out the properties, had great tenants, not really much in the way of issues. But I think now, with the advent of new regulations, new further taxes, it loses its shine as to why you'd want to continue to do it.
And so how does that, what are you actually doing with your UK properties?
So I'm selling them.
Okay.
Lock, stock and barrel.
Every single one?
Every single one.
What about your own home?
Even selling that.
Okay.
Everything's for sale.
So, this is quite common as well, isn't it? This is what I'm hearing from quite a few people. I was speaking to someone, a friend that's come over, and he's a very patriotic person. He's served in the army. He's been on many tours, and I think he probably even has the flag tattooed somewhere on his arms or somewhere like that. The gentleman he's lovely, but he king or queen of country. And it amazed me when he said that is it. And it does, I don't know, it even takes me back a bit that you say it, because I haven't said it, and I won't yet say it, because I still think it is the best city in the world. Maybe that is because of I am patriotic, and I do think we have a humour and we have a belief and we have something that, whether it's the royals or we've got something very unique, but it's happening more and more often, and it's concerning for me.
I think, Luke, the thing here is that it's like how I was feeling in the last, probably the last 2 years, which is I don't want to leave the UK because I'm born here. I was born there. Grew up there. That's all I know. And when I was looking back to say, well, it's been great to me, and I've been good for it too. It works both ways. But every day I was thinking, when will it go back to how things were in perhaps the 80s, 90s, etc., how people live, how people were. And every day that was going past, it was going further and further away from how I used to like it. So I think if you moved back now, I think you'd find it's not quite how you would have left it, for example.
Is it like gradual? Is it something so minimal other than the recent kind of times where we've had multiple prime ministers, but we had a Tory leadership, and it was for many years, and before that we had the Blair kind of leadership was for many years. Has it been a general decline consistently? It's like, I suppose, not, when you're my son, I see him grow up and I don't see every inch that he grows every day, but when someone hasn't seen him for 5 years, wow, he's grown so much. So have we not really noticed it over the last 15, 20 years?
If you live there, then you will see there's one thing that will happen. For example, they'll bring in, like what they did with the ULEZ charge, okay, or the congestion charge, or getting rid of car lanes and replace them with bike lanes. I'm not saying bikes are a bad thing, but there's no space for cars. Even ambulances can't get through. But one after the other, all these events, they add up. So, whilst you live there over a period of time, you keep saying, "Oh, well, that's okay. We'll deal with it. We'll live with it." Because I think as a nation, we sort of accept things. But I think if you had been away 10 years ago and then came back, I think you'd be startled.
From my point of view, having been here for over 20 years, selling property here in Dubai, I think we only talk to people from the UK or from Europe who want to leave or they want to invest over here. And it's rare for them to say, I love England, but I want to move here. They're always going to have some reason to leave the UK. There used to be a time when many people who stayed they wanted to stay in the UK and invest here in Dubai. Get that now, and it was you talk about it was a gradual. I think it was very gradual as to why people actually decided they're moving here. Everything, they're moving their families, moving their kids, they're moving their businesses, etc. Now that was a sort of a slow trickle over the last 20 years. It was just purely for investment. I'm seeing in the last 2 or 3 years, I forget when COVID ended, but so let's say the last 3 years, and I think it's everybody here in the company. We're getting calls every single day from people, not just in the UK, from North America, from Canada, from anywhere in Europe and the UK. We're predominantly, I'm British, we're all British in this room, so obviously we can speak for our own nation, but there are many people around the world who have had enough of what's going on. And I think we've gone from a trickle now to I wouldn't call it a deluge, a flood of people, but certainly we're getting a lot more people, significant numbers of people moving everything that they own and have in their country, UK specifically, that we're talking about today, and they're coming here to Dubai. Maybe it's going to increase, maybe it's going to slow down, maybe it'll just carry on at the same rate, I don't know, but I'm certainly seeing significant uptick in contrast to how it was maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. Everybody was saying before, I want to invest in Dubai, but no, I'm not going to move here. But now that's the contrary, and you're a very good example of that.
I'm thinking, how can we be in this country and we have a vision, and usually things that are put in place happen? There's not much that doesn't happen, and I have those goosebumps that when I land into Dubai DXB and I see a plane with, I think the Emirates plane with Vision of the Future or something like this, and it gives you goosebumps, and then safety and no taxes and happiness and warmth, yet we don't have a plan in place for one of the biggest
economies of the world.
How can a great nation like the UK has been worldwide a brand, in the top brands in the world as a country, go from having competent leaders to people that go and do a referendum and like you say, they're just making it up as they go along. It's just the state of things and how they are now.
Can we just go back to, everything you're talking about, is this how we feel, and these are subjective feelings that we're getting and the reasons why we're coming to live here and why we work here as well. So if we look at specifics as to you as a landlord in the UK, you've decided that it's just not worth keeping property in the UK and it's better for you to come and live in Dubai and become an expat. I know there's some personal reasons with regards to your immediate family, etc. But just from a financial aspect, because we're going to talk about the budget in a minute anyway, just from a financial, what are the reasons why you've done it?
Okay, so number one, obviously as an investor, you've got buy-to-let properties, you've got income coming in from tenants, where it used to be the case that they'd knock off whatever you're paying for the mortgage, and then tax with what you're left after all the expenses. Now they're saying we don't care about the mortgage. So that already puts a lot of pressure on landlords. So I was in a fortunate position where I realized what was going to happen. I started paying a lot of them off. But then you've got a next set of problems. I'll just give you a very clear example. 2 days ago, I received a notice from people that look after the deposit for tenants. So one of my properties, I had a new tenant in there about 1.5 years ago, and they've gone. 1.5 years ago, I refurbished the place. Spent a lot of money on it, and I've got it back and it's trashed. Now, I had to put a case forward, so I put photographic evidence to say this is before, this is after, and the dispute service, which manages it, said, sorry, you're the landlord, it was your job to make sure it was maintained, you're not getting a penny back from your deposit, and there's no appeal process. So it was just further confirmation to say, well, everything is tenant-led in the UK. So landlords have got no hope whatsoever in any form of regulation. And, recently they've brought in, the Renters Reform Act, which means there's no more AST. So you can't say, okay, I'm going to rent it out for 6 months or 12 months. As part of the new reforms, they're saying, okay, it's ongoing, and the tenant can stay there as long as they want, month to month. Then on top of that,
can you adjust the rent in that time?
Well, they're putting in restrictions as to how much. So they're going to put in some, forms of rent control. But the important thing is, look, you can't get rid of the tenant. You have to find a very good reason to get rid of them. Okay, and you can't. One of the reasons can't be that they didn't pay their rent. I mean, surely that's like the biggest thing. If you don't pay, then why should you still stay there? But now what they're saying is that it must be at least over 3 months under the new act where you can do something about it. And that's when you can start the process. So you're probably looking at about 6 months at least before, and the thing is that landlords in the UK are, they've got borrowing. These are investments. They've worked hard to get these investments, and then you've got a tenant who's not going to pay. You can't do anything about it. While all this time, the landlord's still having to pay, the mortgages and all the other associated costs, and there's nothing you can do. And equally, you can't take back the property. The tenant can give you a 2-month notice to leave, but they must have been there at least 6 months for you to then be able to ask them to leave. But again, it must be in your case, you have to give a very, very good reason for them to go.
What happens if you want to sell the property? Is that a good enough reason?
Yeah, but it can't be within the first 6 months, and then you've got to give them notice. And then I think there's more detail to this, but it basically goes against the landlord. So you question, well, if everything's weighted towards the tenant, and I'm not saying it should be weighted towards the landlords, I'm just saying it should be fair. And looking at it from a fair, both sides point of view. It's not. And this is why it just adds to the many reasons as to, there's no point to continue as a landlord in the UK.
So what would you have said, because this decay, as we've mentioned, has probably gone on for the last 20 or 30 years, where you're sounding to me like you're 80% favour of the tenant, 20% in the landlord. What would it have been during the heyday that made you happy? And
it was, I would say, probably as close to 50-50.
Okay. Would you have felt a lot of these things, Stephen, I don't know if you agree, but probably we have things in Dubai in place where you can increase rents by a certain amount. There are favours, I'd probably say, on the tenant side, you have to give them a year's notice and it has to be for certain reasons. So there are similarities, but what I do feel is the quality of the tenant here might be quite different to the quality of the tenant in the UK now. I feel.
I mean, you can do all sorts of things. If the tenant bounces a check, for instance, here, you can put a travel ban on them. Number one, that's one of the things you can do. Okay, you might not be able to get your money back, but at least you're going to stop him from running away, unless he's already run away, of course. Which, for all intents and purposes, are not actually. This has happened a couple of times with some of my landlords over the years, and it's actually quite a good thing because they weren't paying the market rate. Now you can get a new tenant in, and it's a very fast market. I'm not sure what it's like in the UK. You say you had some really good tenants and it worked well. What are we talking about? Vacancy rates, occupancy rates?
Maybe I'm an exception, but I hardly lost any tenants.
Okay.
Because I always did whatever maintenance was needed on time. Always checked in on the tenants. Tenants were happy. I'd even increase the rents every single year.
Right.
And I'd give them enough notice to say, look, if you can't afford it, move on, sort of thing. But I don't want you to go. More often than not, they'll say, no, you've been a great landlord. Why should I leave? and it's worked all this time. And now, in the last year, I've started to give them all notices to say, look, it's been great, but I have to sell up. And they're like, we don't want you to sell up. But that's just how it is.
But I read that there was, for every rental property that goes on the market, on average, I think this probably could have been a famous property portal in the UK, that mentioned there was 17 applications per property.
Really?
So there is a big demand. So whereas
there's a huge housing shortage in the UK.
Of course, right.
It's not, I think the housing shortage is there, but I think the key thing is landlords getting out.
Right. Yes.
But irrespective as to whether they move here or anywhere else, landlords are getting out because they're saying it's heavily weighted towards tenants. Financially, it's no longer worth it. So as landlords go out, and if you look at the government's trying to do this to try and bring what they believe is parity, okay, and so that we've got a better rental market for tenants. But who's going to suffer in the end is the tenants, because less properties to rent. And like Luke said, look at the waiting lists now, which means that whoever is left as a landlord can hike the prices.
And people can't afford to buy the
people can't afford to rent them either or buy them.
So I heard a statistic this morning, which was in the UK. I mean, when I left the UK, I think to get a mortgage, it was around 3.5 times your annual salary. Now, the average is 8 times your annual salary to buy a property. So a lot of people just cannot
People are struggling,
it.
Stephen.
People are struggling. And that's if you can find something to buy. Anyway, so here you are. You've taken, can you, I don't know if you want to share this information, but how many properties and what sort of value do you have?
Here?
In the UK.
I've probably got about 14 there.
Okay.
Yeah. Value probably around 7 million.
Sterling?
Yeah.
It's about 30 million dirhams, something like that. And what sort of returns were you getting there, do you think? Did you ever work out your
net yield?
Yeah.
It was just 4 years ago. And predominantly they're in London and South London, where I'm from. About 5.6, 5.7.
Okay, because you bought
because I bought 10, 15 years before. Maintained the properties but kept the prices going up just in line. So about 5.6, 5.7. But then you start seeing that eroding away. As
a best estimate, if I was to buy one of your properties today at the market price, what would I expect to get in terms of return?
As a yield, you would struggle at around 2.5-3%.
And I've got to pay tax on that.
Don't forget the tax.
And how much tax am I paying on that?
So you'll pay on the rent will be considered as income. So you'll be taxed
depending on my
income tax,
my salary,
and it's not, and it's also not dependent upon where you reside either. You could be here and rent it out there,
right?
Because the property's in the UK, you'd have to continue paying the taxes on the rent there.
So if I'm an overseas resident and I own property in the UK and I'm getting 2 or 3% net yield, then I'm paying tax. What rate of tax would I be paying?
Income tax. So whatever your band is. So 40%.
But they don't take into account your overseas earnings, do they? Before they calculate what your
your UK income.
Your UK, without 25%, something like that.
They won't consider certain income as it's disregarded, such as foreign income.
Okay, but if I was living in the UK and I'm more than likely to be a high tax bracket because I owning 45.
I think it's 40, 45.
Yeah. Okay, very good.
It is clear to me that with the announcement with stamp duty increase, that over a period of time they want to make it a one property society. We don't want landlords having multiple properties. If you are going to do it, you're not going to get rental yield, and if you don't want to rent it, then your council tax, I've heard now, could be banded based on the number of days you use it, if it's a second home or how much you've paid for it. It does seem to me that it's going to be a luxury for some to say.
Absolutely. And plus, Luke, the other thing is they're actually in talks now about making the council tax a burden for the actual landlord, where at the moment the tenant pays it.
Right.
So that's another thing.
So that just means rents are going to be increasing to cover that.
So whoever's left is going to do that,
Okay, so I'm very conscious of the time, so let's talk about the specifics of what you've understood from the budget from our new Chancellor and not our new Chancellor.
Well, I was slightly different, Stephen, because I did buy a property and I forced it through yesterday, and I took that gamble that there was going to be an announcement because I felt there was a constant mentions of 22 billion black hole. I've read reports that actually it wasn't 22 billion and then Ombudsman actually found out it was 9, and it's just appeared, so it's trick or treat, but it seems to me at the moment that overseas landlords, they're going to hit you, and so therefore I went for it. Had I purchased the property today, so 24 hours later, I would have paid an extra 20,000 plus in SDLT. And that's not just affecting me, for listeners, as I'm an overseas buyer. This is affecting any citizen living in the UK that is buying more than one property. So the surcharge has gone up from 3 to 5%.
Yeah. So it's as you say, they're trying to deter you from having more than one there.
It seems madness that we have you've got 17 applications per rental property. You have so many children living with their parents and they just want to get out. It should be allowing for more landlords to open up their properties, but at 2.5% rental yield, and then
why should they bother?
And an argument with a tenant because they've just trashed. What's the point? Leave it empty.
So in the end, it's going to come back and bite them, the government, because you're going to have tenants who say, we can't afford this rent, because now where there used to be, 10 apartments on this road, now there's 2, and the rent's so high we can't afford it. So where do we live? And so, at some point, I have a funny feeling it may go back the other way, but I think it would take a lot for a government to say, okay, let's reverse all of this, because they're generally not very good at going back on what they've done.
So there are a couple of things that are certainly going to affect the landlords in the UK, any business owner in the UK, but also one can be sitting here in Dubai and thinking, actually, this could be a real positive for Dubai. We obviously have one of our biggest markets is the UK, for people in the UK buying property here in Dubai. And again, I go back to the fact that, yes, we're talking about UK, but this is probably happening all over Europe. Even though I understand that our capital gains tax in the UK is less than anywhere else in Europe. I don't know if you're aware of that. I don't know what the statistics are. But then again, the growth that you get in the UK is obviously far greater than you would in most other cities in Europe.
I totally agree, Stephen. I don't think it's Europe as well, just mentioning that. I think, I was speaking to a landlord and he's just come back from LA. Right. So it's not just Europe; it's a worldwide issue that is really. And then you've got Dubai opening its arms, saying, "Come here."
Yeah,
it's madness for me to think, regardless of what anyone's views are on politicians, they are paid a sufficient amount of money, good or bad. They have to have thick skin, and I think it's an awful job to go into. However, they choose to go into it, but how can these leaders be coming up with the answers that they're coming up with? I think it's purely because they know that they have a certain amount of time.
You've got 4 years. This is the big difference, isn't it? You've got these countries all around the world. We're just about to have an election in the US. We've just recently had an election in the UK and various other European countries, etc. It's because they're in it for 4 years and they've got to make decisions. They've got to make plans. They've got to do something. Plus, they want to stay in power.
What you've got to remember, Stephen, is it's all about the votes.
Yeah.
Okay. And the reality is, I'm in a very fortunate position, but I've worked hard for what I've got, and a lot of business people have, or even if you're not a business person, some of these people have worked 3 jobs, etc., just to do better for themselves, right? The problem is it goes against them because they are probably in the top 10%, top 1% of the country, right, and the rest are struggling. So as a government, who do you pick on to say, well, how do we get the most votes? It's not going to be people like me. They don't really care
but the UK needs money.
But it needs money.
And these people with money are going to leave.
Well,
they are. But we've got more millionaires leaving the UK than any other country in the world, bar China. The China population is considerably larger than the UK. So on a percentage terms, there has got to be one stat that's looked at to think, how do we retain these people? How do we keep the high streets open? Who's spending the money? Where's Minesh going with these 14 rental properties? Because there's hundreds of Mineshes there that are leaving.
Yeah,
and it just doesn't seem to me that these got that. You've got a 4-year term. I think people are going into this job thinking, I'm not going to last 4 years. I'll be surprised if I last 2 years. And this is the system. So therefore, if I'm only going to have my child for 2 years, well, I don't really care about their manners because I'm going to deal with them in 18 years time when they become adults. So do you know what I mean? I just feel it's a poison
that's where it's such a huge contrast with the UAE, which is run like a business. This is a corporation.
Well, look at Stephen, just look at some of these facts. Okay, I just had a look yesterday, right? On Tuesday, Dubai approved its budget.
Yes.
Okay, for 2025 to 2027. Okay, expected revenue is 302 billion AED. Expected expenditure is 272 billion AED.
So surplus.
So surplus of 21% for the first time. 46% of next year's budget is going to go on infrastructure, roads.
Say that again.
46% of next year's budget.
Can I just tell you, I was talking to a guy, an economist this morning, who told me that the infrastructure of GDP in the UK is around 3%.
Yeah.
45%.
We're 45% on infrastructure. UK, less than 3%.
So they're saying 46% next year's budget to go on infrastructure, roads, bridges, energy, drainage, because they've learned, when we had the storms, etc., they've said, okay, we need to tackle that, and they get on with it, I think. And 30% of this budget is going to go towards health, education, community services, social services. I think, and I know that everyone always says that, but you're painting a picture of Dubai that looks all rosy. This is fact.
Yeah, and it's happening.
This is
and it will happen.
Yeah,
if the government say it's going to happen, it will happen.
And I think it comes
1,000,000%.
I think it comes actually, harping on a bit on Luke's point. It comes from strong leadership. Stable leadership, and where the motivation is not, how do we stay in power for 4 years, but like here, which is say, look, we're in power, we want great for our country.
Yes.
How do we do that?
How do we get to number one?
How do we get to number one in everything? Well, if we don't get to number one, we'll make sure we've tried as hard, and we'll throw everything at it. And the other aspect to that, and which is very important, is they're not looking at it to say, well, how do we grab as much money as we can off everyone and as much as we can? Whereas I think what I've learned in my 7-8 months here is, they've looked to say, we're okay with just taking a little bit of everything and it will go around. Just encourage people to come here and having a lot more people paying a little bit will pay for stuff. And make it better. And I think that's the difference.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you say, and I think it's opportunities, and there are things go in circles, and I suppose this would be my hope that the UK over the next 20 or 30 years does go in a circle, and we do have a change of government, or we've had a recent change of government, and it all works out rosy. But I believe if you gave someone parties voted to go in and you gave them a 10-year period, it would be run completely different. And again, if that individual passed away or unforeseen circumstances, the vote goes back to the people and not to the cabinet to pick their next leader, because it's just been disastrous. But I would hazard a guess that the current Prime Minister will probably be out within the next 24 to 36 months. I think we've got one of the worst mayors in London in the Western world. It's disastrous what's going on there. Crime is out of control. Having said that, we love it. And having said that, Stephen, if you speak to most GCC clients, the number one place that they want to invest is London, right? They want to go there.
They love going there.
They love going there. We've had a pull out of London.
It's not just London, it's England.
Of course. I think it is still underpriced, even in London at the moment. I think you've had a lot of money coming out with the Russians and maybe the Chinese.
I think it will go down a lot more.
Yeah.
I think I think now is if you were thinking of getting out, now is the time. Right. Because I think it's going to get, considerably bad over the next few years. I'm not scaremongering. It's just based upon what I've seen, what I read. And the other factor, I think, a few interesting factors came up from the budget yesterday. Okay, number one, they've still left it there so that if, for example, you've got a UK company that you want to ultimately sell, you can become a non-resident and not have to pay the CGT on it. So it's still there. Will it still be there next year? I don't know, or the year after. Okay, and the other factor is, and what a lot of expats don't.
So that suggests that people who suspect that that's going to happen, they're going to be in more of a hurry to move away.
And if they're already thinking about it, now is the time. You don't waste time now in thinking about it, because they've announced how bad the deficit is and how they're going to need more money, and there's more of this to come. So while you've got a chance, use it. Okay, and the other key things, right? For example, when you get to a certain age, you're going to start saying, well, what do I do in terms of inheritance, etc. And then there's gifting. Okay, interesting thing that I picked up was at the moment, when you gift someone, you've got to survive 7 years, otherwise it gets taxed. Okay, so going forward, if the person gifting is a non-resident, okay, of the UK, then the 7-year rule won't apply, and the beneficiary, and basically the beneficiary is not taxed. So the 7-year rule goes out the window if you're the gifter and you're a non-resident.
So what does 7 years become? It has to
straight
become
away.
You become overseas.
So as long as
you
you're
get taxed straight away, you mean?
No, meaning you, as long as you're a non-resident and you fulfill the requirements of being a non-UK resident, you could gift someone, and you won't then have to do the whole 7-year survival. Because if you don't survive the 7 years at the moment, they'll want tax on what you've gifted.
Well, that's a good thing.
That's
a good thing for him. Right. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, it's a good thing. And but what would be the reasoning being to free up properties in the UK for overseas who said, right, enough's enough and I want to get out?
Yeah. So you may, for example, you've got at the moment an opportunity, again, another window which hasn't yet been closed. Hence why I'm trying as fast as possible to sell every property, which is I can sell my properties based upon paying. I have to pay tax on them because they're UK properties, but I'll only have to pay tax on the gain since April 2015. Okay, so let's say you bought the property in 2010 for 200 grand, and then today it's worth say 450. And 2015 it was worth 400. You're only having to pay the tax on the 50 grand. Yeah. That's the situation at the moment if you're a non-resident. But then you have to make sure you fulfill the obligations of being a non-resident and not become a temporary non-resident either. But if you
get a sense that's going to change?
I believe so. I think
for the worst, of course.
Yeah. It's not going to get for the better. And I think there's a lot of these things which they probably would have put in place if they could, but the logistics of putting in new laws and the practical application of them is not going to take a few months. So probably in the background, someone's there saying, okay, we'll need forms for that, we'll need this, we'll need that. And someone's in the background preparing for the next budget or the one after.
Preparing, geez, that would be mad if they were
so while
preparing.
You can, that's an opportunity. If you've got UK properties and if you feel like me to say, well, is it really worth it anymore? And you've got a gain there, and you obviously you'd have to want to leave the UK. And I'm not saying necessarily come to Dubai, but wherever you're going to go where there's a favourable tax regime, now is a good time for you to go. Make roots elsewhere, get rid of what you've got in the UK. I think now is as good a time as ever. And on top of that, and this is sorry, I'm go on a bit, but the other thing that I felt was interesting from yesterday, we knew that non-doms, are going to feel it those that are in the UK. And they're basically saying now that...
You mean overseas residents who are living in the UK?
Living in the UK.
So foreign passport owners.
Yeah, so if you're basically a non-dom, where your domicile is not in the UK, and you live in the UK, they're saying, okay, now you've got to pay the tax on your worldwide income, where it used to be that you pay only the tax on UK-based income. So, as a result, you're going to find these non-doms are
leaving,
more likely to leave now than ever before.
Sure.
It makes sense for them to do that. But then an interesting thing comes out, which is if you've got an individual who's an expat, let's say, for example, yourselves, and you've been out of the UK for some time now, what would you say?
12 years, yeah.
Okay, 12 years. And
21.
Okay, so at this point, if you've got... you would be deemed domiciled in the UK for inheritance tax. And I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah.
No.
Right?
Do you lose that?
You can lose it. There's
if
processes.
you give back your passport or something?
Well, that's one way of doing it.
Okay.
And the other is that, you basically choose a domicility, and then they won't necessarily tell you that you've lost your UK domicility now.
Okay.
So a lot of the devil is in the detail as to when you're no longer around. Okay. But that said, yesterday, one of the interesting things she mentioned was the fact that, or it came out after what I read, is on one hand, obviously they want to, they're not putting in things to encourage non-doms to stay in the UK, but non-residents and the whole idea of tax domicility is now merging. They're getting rid of domicility, which means that if you're going to live, if you're a non-resident and you're away for 10 years, you're no longer going to have to worry about the domicility issue.
Oh, there we are.
So it's fantastic if you're moving over here, and as long as you're out for 10 years, the inheritance tax doesn't kick in. Otherwise, it does.
Surely it would kick in if you had a UK asset.
Yeah, that's the only caveat.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't be paying if you're a UAE resident.
No.
And you have a UAE property.
Correct.
And you pass away, you will not be paying inheritance tax
Correct.
on that.
Correct.
Okay. There are just one thing I was going to touch on. There were a lot of there's the black hole to fill, and too much too soon could have caused a lot of problems. And I think going back to what you touched on maybe 10 minutes ago, there will be more that will come out. I think we mentioned maybe 3 budgets, or was there a mini budget as well? So there's
4.
a few extra.
3 more to go. Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if you hear about this exit tax. Certainly in the next kind of.
It would be very strange if they didn't.
Yeah.
Because a lot of sort of the big brands either have, like the US, they charge you tax no matter where you live, or they look at the Australian model, etc., where there are various exit taxes. But I think if they could have, they would have yesterday, but they don't have enough time to have put it in place by now. But I wouldn't rule out a year's time or 2 years' time for it to be in play.
Agree.
So, now is as good a time as ever, I would say.
To
move.
To where?
Anywhere except there.
Can we say Dubai? Can we say Dubai, please?
I'm not biased to that, because if you're asking, okay, what does it make sense to do if you're in the UK? And I'm not saying necessarily that you're a multi-millionaire, but you've done okay, you've worked hard and you've got a few quid. It doesn't make sense for you to hang around there much longer. Now, where do you go? Of course, you're going to have options. There's still Monaco, Switzerland, etc. Personally, I think UAE wins, and the reason I moved, because it ticks more boxes than any other place. But it'd be wrong for me to say there's only Dubai.
No, I think you should. Anyway, I think we're running out of time, and there's so much more we could talk about, especially about this, the businesses and why people will be closing their businesses down in the UK, having seen this budget, and hopefully moving here, etc. But it's not all bad news for the UK, but I think on the whole, here in Dubai, we're going to benefit in some way from what's going on in the UK and elsewhere. And that certainly seems to be the way things are going in the last few years, as I've said earlier. I want to thank you both for coming in and spending your time this morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Luke.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Minesh Patney.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.